Susi Altrichter. Welcome to the lockdown sessions.
Hey, Brad, good to see you.
How are you?
Locked down in Munich, Germany, but the sun is shining and we are still allowed to go out, so I'm all good.
Brilliant. Well, look, you and I have known each other. We just established for over 7 years. And one of my finest memories of our early times together was when there was you, me, and one other person, actually, because you had somehow secured a suite
I remember that, yeah.
in a hotel in the Czech Republic when we were on a 4-day program. And we just always found ourselves coming back to your room after the workshops to get room service. And I can still remember you had this beautiful sort of galleried staircase that went upstairs and a living room. And I would go back to my pokey little room, which looked out over a brick wall. And you had this beautiful view of the road. And how did you get that?
Well,
first of all,
I can tell you that much. I've been back to the same hotel probably 20 times since. I never got that room again.
Never got that room.
I honestly don't know what went, well, to my advantage or wrong in their booking system. But yeah, I remember that too, that it became kind of the extended office hours with the three of us ordering room service, laptops open, continued work. Yeah.
I'm glad you said that last bit, the continued work. We weren't just drinking really lovely red wine and beer.
You work so much better with some lovely red wine and Czech beer.
So look, you sit and operate, and you're not here to talk from a corporate perspective. So I'm not necessarily asking you to sort of give a corporate line, but you are sitting in a position as director of talent acquisition. You head up Europe. So you have a real great sort of scope of not just people in your own team, but from hiring people in, from seeing the changes that the pandemic has brought. And I thought if we could get you on one of these episodes, it would be really interesting to try and understand from you what you've kind of observed and seen in some of the changes and the behaviors that have been taking place. Because working within an open organization like you do, everybody's always communicating. But now suddenly we're all like work from home as of tomorrow. But you've always worked remotely with your team. So actually, like my starter for 10, and I asked the same question to everyone, so we'll take it from there. What have been some of the major observations you have seen when you look out at your team and you look at the behaviors and the way people have been communicating over these last 8 months? Because it is now 8 months since we all received those emails saying work from home starts tomorrow.
Yeah. It's a really good question because for me personally, not much changed. As you said, I have a remote team. I'm in Munich, but my team is spread all over Europe. And in my responsibility, I've always worked with managers all across Europe. So my world, my personal work world was on video for the last 7 years.
Right.
So that actually hasn't changed. But what I underestimated early on in the lockdown was how much it changed for my team, because my team was also remote before. Some of them were grouped in some office locations. We have a big hub in London and a hub in Brno. But many of them, while spending time on video partly before, right now with the shift to home office, for all of them, it shifted to almost 80 to 100% of what we do is video calls. And so I think that is a strain, right? It's exhausting in a different way. And while it wasn't a change for me as much, I definitely could tell with the team that shift.
Yeah. And how does that shift then manifest itself? So what do you then notice people doing, acting, behaving that highlights that shift?
So I think, first of all, it's hard to make generics. So I'll pick a couple of examples. What was interesting is like the group that usually met once a month in London, part of that group started an agile team. So they started working agile and together in Scrum sessions, connecting every day, and oftentimes being on a video line, switching off the cameras, but just to be able to have the chatter while they were doing other work. Right. And there was fantastic feedback from them. And actually, they now want to continue that. For us, we continue to do home office, but the life is becoming more normal now because we do more of our regular work again. We had kind of a slowdown earlier in the year, but that concept, they're like really pushing for, how do we keep that? How can we continue to do that? So on the one hand, there was appetite for that. On the other hand, we saw quickly that when you try to, how shall I say, artificially create things like happy hours or connection points, that very quickly gets awkward, right? So you almost have to really think of, like, if we do a happy hour, like a week ago, we played online Jeopardy. That was a huge success. That was fun. We also tried online lunch. That was weird.
I don't want to watch you eat.
Yeah, sorry, I made that mistake. It sounded fun. We ordered food for each other, but that wasn't that great. But I do think generally 8 months in, what I do think we're starting to see is that it takes so much more effort to keep a team cohesive and together when there are never personal interactions. Because even though they were remote before, I used to go to London once a quarter, right? The team used to meet once a month, maybe even once a week. There were just more informal personal touch points that create some kind of cohesion that's hard to do when everything is always virtual.
Right, because we've become hyper digitally connected and hyper physically disconnected. And I used to like you coming to London on that quarterly basis because I'd drag you out to Hampstead to walk with me and one of my dogs.
Exactly. That was like the 2 hours of sanity of my London trips.
Right. Although walking with Rocky, I don't know whether it's true sanity, but at least it's fun. But you're right. And how do you then, because, you know, at the beginning, I was joking with someone the other day, you know, at the beginning of lockdown, if I read another document on LinkedIn about how to work with your virtual team, and by the way, I think I produced an infographic on it myself. So I put my hands up. I was one of them. I mean, there were just so many people commenting on virtual teams. And like you, I've worked 25 years remotely. My team is based across Europe and APAC. And some of the team we've never even met in person. So for us, it's not such a huge difference. But I think what I'm picking up from what you're saying is it's fine to work as a remote team as long as you have some touch points to build that level of intimacy that creates the team feeling. How have you gone about creating that kind of intimacy? You know, you guys are dealing with people the whole time. You're part of understanding people's behavior. You're the front door entrance point for anyone joining your company. So it's constantly assessing people and feelings. So how have you gone about developing that kind of intimacy or maintaining it, maybe, because the team is established? How do you maintain it?
Yeah, I think to your point, I mean, I take it as a big blessing that our team was mostly established already. I mean, we also welcomed a couple of new people since March, who I really admire for how they leaned in on kind of getting on board in a time where you can't meet the team. I think the honest answer is we're still figuring it out on how do you maintain the cohesiveness. I think a lot of it is on all layers to constantly remind ourselves of awareness and assuming positive intent. I think what's missing when you never meet in person is, as you say, is this kind of trust layer. of do I trust you have my best interest in mind? Do you really understand where I'm coming from? And I think if you never meet in person, what adds in my world is like 40 people connecting with each other virtually in English, while for most of the 40, English is not native language. So you also have the added complexity of easily misunderstanding. And I think over the last couple of weeks and months, we have seen topics between team members where I think previously those would probably not made it to a team call or a bigger discussion because they would have been picked up over a coffee or in between people, more so than at the moment.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because you're kind of starting to go down, it might even be a bit of a rabbit hole, but I think it's an interesting one to go down, that kind of higher level emotional trigger that we have when we don't get those moments to sit down and have a coffee or have a private chat. And I wonder, have you noticed a distinction between kind of the emotional intelligence that people have at the moment with regards how quickly they react to things or not react, or overreact? Is there an emotional boundary that maybe we've crossed a little bit because we're so disconnected?
I'm not sure if we can connect that purely to kind of the remote thing. I think over the last 6 to 8 months, I think we all need to give ourselves some kudos or acknowledge that it's a out of the ordinary situation. Mm-hmm. What I found most interesting, and actually this was less so with my team because most European countries went through the COVID waves relatively close to each other. Right. But what was fascinating is in my global roles to observe how we all went through the typical emotions of a change curve at different points. Like weeks when I would be down or struggling to adopt, my US counterparts would not be in the same place. And then 3 weeks later, they would struggle to adopt, but I'm already over that. So I need to kind of like, why is that just a big deal? We are dealing with this for weeks.
Right.
And so I would less make it about the disconnection, but more of like, we are all going through the curves at different times and affected in different ways, right? People with small kids where schools are closed are in a very different place, and maybe some that need to take care of relatives or are worried about elderly parents, or people in Madrid that are not allowed out of the house for 8 weeks are in a different place than I am. So I think that was more where I felt of balancing, or keeping that in mind, that people might be quicker to react to a trigger that normally they brush off for many reasons that maybe have nothing to do with the work environment at all.
I think that's so true. I know from speaking to people across Europe, globally, but particularly across Europe, who were homeschooling, living in apartments, not able to go out. One person in the relationship has been, sent home from work. Another one is working from home. There's not enough bandwidth on the Wi-Fi to get the kids on the school. I mean, and that's before 9 o'clock in the morning, right? I mean, that's all kicked off before 9 o'clock. People who have got, no balcony, they're in a 4th floor of an apartment. They've got to stand by the side of the window to get a bit of sunshine in. I mean, you've got to look at what you're grateful for. I was chatting with someone a few weeks back from Singapore, and he was saying how, we're all in the same storm. We're not all in the same boat. And it's true, right? It creates almost a higher level of empathy. I think for the first time in my lifetime, I can exhibit empathy to every person on the planet. If I choose to.
Yeah.
So that kind of emotional trigger that you talk about, I suppose in part people can spiral quite quickly and quite differently to how they would normally react. How do you then compensate for that? How do you show the team that actually we need to be making more allowances? Because I mean, that's great teamwork as well, if you're able to do it. But how do you do it? For me, is the question. Well, that's where the learning is.
I think we had different examples where, as you say, it actually came back to, like, we had debates on a team level where there are very different opinions, right, about process changes or actual cases that are happening with the business that we bring to the team and then discuss, right, of how would we deal with that. And where we had intense debates, and then afterwards myself and some of the other leaders were taking a step back and thinking, like, that caught us by surprise. Where did that intensity come from? And when, after kind of thinking about it as a leadership team, going back to the people involved, getting different perspectives, it actually did come back to this: did I hear you right? Right? Did I jumped to a conclusion when you were saying X, Y, Z? Is that really the case? In a way, it's as exactly as you said, is like, can we choose to pause, not jump into the reaction, give the benefit of the doubt, right, before we kind of come to a conclusion. Now, easier said than done. I think we all have good days where we're great at this, and we all have bad days where this is the 5th interaction of a day, where if it's been a long lockdown day, you might be well.
Sounds a bit loaded, yeah.
Yeah, but in theory, I think that's where, as a team, I think we're spending more time on things like, how do you give feedback right? How do you seek to understand before you jump in a situation? But also some of, like, okay, if there's some topics that keep being a hot button topic, right? Are there things in the processes we actually can change, and we can all agree to change, and do some of this basic hygiene, almost like, of how we work, to remove some of them? Because it seems like when you remove the personal interaction, and then process and tools and stuff is kind of the bare bone you're falling back on. And so if there are irritating points in those, they're suddenly more irritating for people than they were before.
Right. Yeah. How have you grown yourself as a leader?
Oh God, Brad, always these difficult questions.
Oh, I know. I asked somebody, how are you, the other day, and they told me that was a difficult question right now. So I'm really stepping up the
okay, you're really stepping up the game.
Yeah.
I think maybe two things come to mind. One is really a personal development goal that I have grappled with for years, and still am, and probably will continue to be. But in this whirlwind of everything that's been going on, I finally have kind of realized, if I don't prioritize my own time as high as some of the whirlwind that's going on, I won't be able to keep this up indefinitely. So I have been better in, oddly enough, in home office, I've been better at drawing the boundary of keeping to blockers, taking time for personal things that are important than I have been previously. And I think that helps with keeping a clear head and then actually being focused when I'm on. The other thing, I think, as a leadership team, and I think this goes way beyond me, is training this empathy muscle. I think we have, as an organization, I have great role models with other leaders leading the way, but to really show empathy, give flexibility, let go even more. I think for me, as I have been leading remote, I didn't have to get used to how do you lead when you can't control people. Mm-hmm. But my world changed because we used to do hundreds of hires a month. And then from March till October, we did very few. So what productivity looks like for the team, how I measure success for the team, etc., all of that changed. And so that was kind of as a leader, looking at contribution in a different way, giving more freedom for that. I think that was the challenge of the last couple of months.
I love when you say training the empathy muscle. I think that's great. How did the team react to that? Because as a leader, I expected of you. And actually, I think you have a fundamental layer, even from what I know of you, where empathy is not a big stretch for you to move into. What about the rest of the team? Because suddenly we're measuring people on a different level, right? It's not about productivity, having 80 open recs a month that you're kind of dealing with. How did empathy, no, not how did empathy, was empathy able to help the team move through this? Because into team dynamics shifted when this happened. We've already kind of touched on it, you know, that we're disconnected now, even though we're hyper connected. Did you notice the team showing it more?
I definitely, now this is where you probably will really see the change, is that when you and I started working with each other, I was involved in every one of our single hundreds of recs, right? I've really tried to.
I remember that.
I've really tried to step away from that. So I definitely think for my leadership team, we've been on the journey together of where can we be supportive to the team? How can we do it? How can we think of different things? Right. But I also think empathy for us in the last couple of months meant helping recruiters that usually work in a world where they can measure what they do on an everyday basis, right? Into a world where many of them work in projects or work on longer term things that are much less measurable, to actually talk about what does that mean for you? What does success look like, etc. And I'm just actually, I think I should ask the question you just asked me, the team next week, but I'm just really happy on the amount of growth I've seen. Like people stepping up in projects, people suddenly being visible globally, driving new topics, helping out other teams. So I actually think in a way, the last 6 months provided an opportunity to step into other areas and build a lot of muscles. The empathy muscle is one of them, but there are also other areas where we had an opportunity for people to grow because of the new setting.
And what's it like hiring people in when they can't come into the office? I mean, what's that like? Because how do you sell to somebody, right, you're going to come on, but you're going to stay at home? What's that?
It's funny because I presented our new hire orientation every month.
Right.
And I have been for 7 years. So I kind of have the comparison over time. And of course, we changed the new hire to virtual. It used to be in person, everybody coming to Munich. Now it's all virtual. And in the session that I lead, I always talk about the company culture, and then I ask the new joiners to tell me stories of how have they seen the culture come to life yet. Some of them have been with us a couple of weeks, some a couple of months, some are in their first week. So it really varies. What I was relieved to see, to your point of like when you come on board virtually, how is it different, is that everybody that shares examples shares how welcome they feel and how many people reach out to them to offer help.
Right.
So that the spirit is still there. I think the hardest thing to do is help them build relationships over time, right? Mm-hmm. We haven't yet, from a how do you hire people in perspective, interestingly enough, we haven't seen a huge shift in how the conversation happens, what's discussed, etc. But I also think as an IT company, we had close to 50% remote before the pandemic.
Right.
So the shift is the biggest in our customer-facing functions, sales, inside sales, services, where I do expect like we will see more of a shift in the coming month, right? The first couple of months, it was all like, well, this is a short-term thing. Now it's becoming a longer-term thing. So I expect we'll see more of it. But in a way, people are surprisingly resilient and adapting to new circumstances.
We are, right? As a race, we are incredibly resilient. And I've said many times before, you don't know you're resilient until you have to be. And then you find out that you are. And you can really dig deep. And you and I have had, I think, conversations over the years about, endurance and resilience and how to keep moving forward when times are tough. And I know you're right when you talk about, any customer-facing part of an organization has been challenged in the last few months because these guys, they breathe on connections. And all of a sudden, we're asking them to, maintain high levels of targets where most people are not looking at strategically planning beyond 3 months. And if you've got a strategic plan that goes beyond 3 months, you've got to have at least 2 or 3 contingencies because who knows what the world is going to look like. And particularly in consulting and services, that industry has really been challenged. Sales seems to, always goes in cycles. So this is just another cycle. But that kind of selling in extra for people, I feel for these guys, and not just in your company, but every company I talk to that has add-on services where you can sort of add the extra layers. The extra layers aren't necessarily being looked at as options right now because people are just not sure of what's going to happen. And motivationally, I suppose what I'm getting to is asking you the question of how have you ensured from a motivational point of view that your guys are, being resilient, driving forward, keeping going. Like you said, for 5-6 months, you didn't have a freeze, but, the hiring dropped almost to a minimum. So how have you taken that role on as kind of motivator?
Well, in a way, it was a luxury position because we as a company decided that we know how important recruiting capabilities are, right? I mean, if I look around in the market, there are a lot of recruiters out there at the moment looking for jobs because their companies decided not to keep them.
Yeah.
We took a different approach. We said, we know we'll come out of this, and then we need to hire, and we need people that understand Red Hat. So I had the privilege to actually sit down with my team and my leaders and say, what are people passionate about? Which capabilities did they always want to build? And then we launched a massive company-wide project management endeavor. And I borrowed out 60% of my team were allocated to projects outside of talent acquisition.
Oh, I love that.
And it was, I mean, they were all within the wider HR area. It ranged from helping to set up a technical platform of how we deliver trainings to actually getting certified as a trainer and delivering virtual trainings, to working on a compliance project, to working in inter-country mobility projects. I mean, we were really fortunate that we have people that are curious enough to go into different fields, and to have a company that is willing to look at this as win-win.
Yeah.
And so we were able to really dissect and say, like, who has those passion areas, those interest areas to do this, and who is really passionate about core recruiting. And then those were the people that stayed and dealt with the limited workload and built pipeline for the future, which I think, I'm not sure how many of leadership peers at other companies would have the same position to be in, but it really did a lot to motivate the team and also us as managers, because you look around in the industry and, you know, a lot of other managers have to think about, how do I cut a team and all of that. And we got to think about, what skills do we want to develop? How do we make this a win-win for the company, for the team, for everything? So, and it really built a new muscle also for us as leaders, because suddenly we had to do much more project management than we ever signed up for.
And that's a skill in itself if you haven't done it before.
Exactly. So we also build a lot of skill around that in the leadership team, which will pay off long term as well.
I love that. And I know from my experience of working with Red Hatters, passions and talents are part of your model of how you develop people, and trying to align those passions and talents, which is exactly what you just explained there, right? It's the perfect leading by example. Don't just say we're all about passion and talent. Actually, here's a horrible situation, so let's look at it from the most positive perspective we can. What are your passions and where do you want to grow your talents? And let's do it. And creating that level of motivation, I imagine, is probably not just nourishing, but is easy to sustain, because people are choosing their own path.
And it was like actual business challenges we were solving. So I mean, part of hiring less also meant there were a lot of openings within the HR organization that were desperately needing people and weren't able to fill the roles. So it also, I think it did a lot for talent management long term for us as an organization. We've had the first 2 permanent career moves come out of that already. Wow. And so in a way, I really think because of that, or thanks to that, motivation wasn't really the biggest concern. Everybody's happy now that hiring is coming back, don't get me wrong.
No doubt.
Because it's like going through a stretch where you're leaning into something that is not your core expertise is also exhausting.
Right? Yeah, you're working twice as hard, right, just to keep up.
So everybody's happy that reality returns, but we definitely all learned something in it and grew with that experience.
Do you find that the people that you're talking to now that are coming into the business or looking for roles within the business, so with an outward looking gaze now, has the attitudes changed? Do you see a different kind of person coming in to be interviewed?
I wouldn't say a different kind of person. I think, not surprisingly, what is starting to play a bigger role is questions around job security.
Right.
How realistically safe am I in this job? How likely am I succeeding? especially in our industry. A lot of the people we are talking to are still employed in other organizations. So making that leap of faith in the current climate is harder.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that we've seen a general shift in profile, but it's also a bit early to tell, to be honest, because due to us having limited hiring until about a month ago, you're only really starting to see those things coming up now.
Well, when we get you back in the new year for the second episode that you do, we'll start with that. With that question.
Nice pitch, Brad. Nice pitch. Well done.
Always be closing. Look, I feel like we're coming full circle. One last question for you. You've got to work from home for the last few months. Your wonderful partner, who I know, also works from home. How have you not killed each other?
He actually just closed the door. I think this recording was annoying him. How have we not killed each other? I think we're in a luxury situation that our flat is big enough that two people can close the door and both work from home. I think that's a real privilege to have at the moment. We also have enough Wi-Fi capacity for that, which is another blessing. And then I think, at least for me, like I've been going outside every day. So like we are allowed to do that here. And so that definitely has kept me sane. The only other answer is I have like Reddit usually makes me travel 50%. I think we have a lot of couple time to catch up on, so we're fine with not having to be apart.
And this is when I talk about, we need to be also grateful for what we have. You would be out, every other week. You're gone for the week, traveling all over, and actually you get to spend some time with your partner.
Exactly.
Although, interestingly, I'd love to maybe hear from him at some point as to what's it like having Susi at home all the time.
Well, the one thing he will tell you, which is kind of funny, is that the best advantage of having me home all the time is lunch got way better since I'm working from home.
Right.
That's what he was saying.
So a friend who I was chatting to on a podcast a couple of months back, he said when he was sent home, he on the first day of being like working from home, he was working out of the spare bedroom. They had like 3 rooms in their apartment in Singapore. They got 2 kids, so they put the 2 kids in the same room, and he made an office in the spare bedroom. And he came out at lunchtime, and he says to his wife, "What's for lunch?" And she just looked at him. There's the kitchen.
Go and sort it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it just made me laugh because, and he was saying, he also was traveling. He's in a sales role. And like you, a director, remote team, so always traveling around the region. And he was aware that she had to make adjustments for suddenly having him back at home all the time. It's always, the person who's traveling, what's it like? You're not traveling. Actually, what's it like for the person who's used from Monday to Friday to having the house to themselves?
You should ask Grant. You have his phone number. He hasn't complained to me yet, but maybe you want to ask him and see what he says. We'll bring him in
for like the first 5 minutes of the next episode, double pitch to you, to get his view. Susi, last final question, I promise. What's your hope as we move through this kind of second phase of lockdown and head towards Christmas time?
What's my hope?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I hope that each of us has had some practice on realizing what keeps us sane, and that we manage to apply it and not get sucked into the craziness around us too much.
I like that. I'm going to use that as the title of the podcast. Don't get sucked in to the craziness.
Yes, it's a good one.
I'm going to scribble it down. Susi, thank you so much for your insight, for your energy. And I'll ask you politely, will you come back in the new year?
All right. Thanks, Brad.
Susi,
good talking to you as
care.
always.
Always a pleasure. Send my love to your other half. I'll speak to you soon.